Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all having me back here again this year. And today I'll be talking about some of the psychological effects of cyberbullying and social media use. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can pull these slides up. Hopefully that's showing up okay for everyone. Um, And I realized that that bio is a little bit dated. I just defended my dissertation last month, so I'm excited to be done with that part of my own learning journey. I ended up running a really small qualitative study looking at how to create effective programs for parents to learn how to address addictive internet use in their children and prevent harms associated with that. And so I'll mention a little bit of some of the takeaways from that research today. Um, I'm a therapist in private practice in Kentucky, and I do specialize in working with children and adults who have internet-related addictions, whether it's to pornography, social media, online gambling, gaming, that sort of thing. So I'll mention a little bit about some of the addictive research, addiction research, and the impact on the developing brain of compulsive screen use, because from my experience, the folks who are likely to um, have experienced the more severe consequences of cyberbullying and or social media use are the ones who become addicted to technology. So they're kind of repetitively exposed to that stimulus potentially that's harmful, so they're more at risk. So I'll mention that a little bit in context. I'll also talk about some of the kind of the underlying mechanisms that make some of these platforms and apps addictive and how they target the developmental vulnerability of youth and children. And I'll also talk about a little bit about some assessment tools that you all can use in your practice if you're concerned that someone you're working with might be addicted to the internet in some form and you want to intervene in some way. I want to start just with a brief little bit of definition and some insight into what cyberbullying looks like now. So, cyberbullying is an umbrella term that just talks about any kind of bullying or harassment or social harm that's caused in the digital medium. So, underneath that umbrella term of cyberbullying is everything you see listed here on the screen. And I'll mention a couple in detail because this is an ever-evolving part of our work, as all of us are in the middle of a tech revolution happening right now when it comes to this recent evolution, kind of since 2017 with artificial intelligence and some of the apps and functions that are available now because of that. So one form of cyberbullying that's really harmful is, let's say someone gets bullied in, quote, the real world, but elements of that experience are captured in photo or video. And then those photos or videos get circulated widely in the digital spaces that that person exists, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter or Discord or Reddit. And in really extreme cases, what can happen is someone experiences what might be a very humiliating or embarrassing moment in their youth. And then that imagery is captured and then recirculated, where they might relive the most painful moments of that memory over and over again with the added layer of exclusion that they experience from being humiliated publicly and the kind of wide exposure of that. And they also might have their primary place that they experience connection be contaminated now with a lot of shame. And so I'll mention that repeatedly as a theme throughout this, that part of the reason cyberbullying and what might be some compulsive social media use attached to that is so damaging is because a lot of people are in this position where the primary source of getting connection is also their primary source of harm, which really mimics sort of a traumatic bonding dynamic between victim and perpetrator, where someone continues to return to an abusive relationship. I find that's a helpful kind of metaphor for looking at people's relationship with the internet when it comes to cyberbullying. There are some really unfortunate cases that have resulted in suicide. I mentioned here Adriana Kook. If you all are familiar with the story, she was a young woman in New Jersey who had a video taken of her getting assaulted at school. And that video continued to get circulated through the internet despite her parents and the school's efforts to delete it. And eventually she completed suicide. That particular dynamic of having an embarrassing moment captured on video and then recirculated is a very common form of cyberbullying. There's also trolling. Trolling can happen, in essence, trolling, an example would be someone goes online to someone's Facebook post, whether they're a stranger to them or not, and just says inflammatory or harassing statements, and then repeatedly shows up to the same post and does it again and again. Sometimes trolling happens to people that I know, and sometimes it happens to people that I don't. And it's also possible that multiple trolls, if you will show up on the same person's profile time and again to harass them in a more targeted way. Some other forms would be setting up a hate site or a group about a particular person. So it might be that there's someone we don't like in our friend group. So we might create a fake Instagram profile using some of their pictures, mimicking them, and then posting lots of humiliating or embarrassing pictures of them to further the humiliation that they experience. Um, this is a more recent development. If you all may be familiar already, but there's a particular form of artificial intelligence called deepfake technology, where you can take someone's image or likeness, like my face, and you can put it on naked or nude bodies and then create videos where that body acts out or engages in sexual acts or all kinds of different things. So in essence, what can happen is someone can take the face or likeness of anyone through their social media posts or pictures they already have of them and then create what looks like pornography of that person that they either use for their personal benefit or, as is often the case in a more bullying context, that video will be shared and sent to lots of people, potentially people that also know this other person. And of course, at this stage in the game, the deepfake technology is so advanced that it can be almost indistinguishable from, quote, the real thing. So it becomes almost impossible for people to defend themselves against the validity of this content. And we can imagine for a young person in the very vulnerable stage of development that they're in around being included with their peers, managing the perception that their peers have of them, how dysregulating emotionally that can be for someone, for anyone, but young people in particular. Some other forms that are important to mention would be things like unwanted sexting or sexual harassment or revenge porn. Revenge porn is a term where if I might be in a relationship with someone and we've exchanged nude or erotic photos of each other or have created pornography of the two of us being sexual, revenge porn would be me releasing those images or those videos to other people, maybe after the relationship has ended, as a way again to embarrass or humiliate you. It's also, there's a lot of kind of power and control dynamics woven into what might be using the concept of revenge porn as leverage to extort someone, which then falls into this last category of sextortion, where people may have images or videos of them that are erotic or nude in some way used against them to get money or to get them to do other humiliating acts. I've worked with a fair amount of teenagers who have been sextorted both from people that they know and strangers online who maybe they were engaging in dialogue with on a messaging or discussion board app like Discord, for example. They may have been interacting with someone and exchanging erotic material, and that someone turns out to be an adult that then tries to extort them with the imagery they have and get some money from their parents and that kind of thing. I think this last piece around deepfake technology and some of what are called nudify apps. Meta just had a kind of a big episode with this in the news where there were lots of nudify ads that were showing up in the stories tab on Facebook. So I think this is going to be a very burgeoning area that's going to be problematic. Just kind of quick prevalence data. According to some recent studies globally, 1 in 6 adolescents reports being victims of cyberbullying, and about 30% of teens in the US identify having at least one episode of being cyberbullied. Another important lens with this is how our current relationship with technology affects our attention. And I'm going to invite you to think about some of these statistics I'm going to share in the context of a person who might be being cyberbullied or addicted to social media. There's a study done by Microsoft in 2015 looking at the human attention span, and what they found was that in the year 2000, the average attention span was 12 seconds long. In 2015, that dropped to 8 seconds, which is shorter than that of a goldfish. 2015 was 10 years ago. That was pre-TikTok, that was pre-Instagram Reels. I'm confident that that number is much lower. Gloria Mark is someone who's done a tremendous amount of research in this area. And she was looking specifically at how often do we get interrupted by our technology. In 2004, she found it was about every 2.5 minutes. We get a notification or an email or a ping or a vibration that summons us out of our task and to our technology. In 2012, that dropped to 75 seconds. And in 2023, when she ran the study again, it's 47 seconds. So all of us on average are interrupted every 47 seconds. And so if we think about that information in context of a person who's being cyberbullied, meaning every time their phone pings and they get a notification from Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook, part of them develops a hypervigilance around, is this one more time, one more tiny cut that I'm experiencing of having this harassment or humiliation of me continued? And imagine how difficult it would be to concentrate or emotionally regulate myself or pursue hobbies and interests outside of technology when every 47 seconds I potentially could be reminded again of the most humiliating moment of my life. Very damaging for any of us, but especially a young person. 10, according to this 2023 study, 10% of people admit to checking their smartphones during sex, and 12% admit to checking it while in the shower. Sometimes when I add this into the presentation, it adds a little bit of comic relief. But in that data, I think is an important thread, and it's that in the 18 to 34-year-old age group, those people are twice as likely to have their smartphone as part of a sexual experience compared to the group that's 35 to 51. And in my clinical experience in working with young people, what I've found is that young people are more likely to have their phone out as part of the sexual experience to begin with, meaning they might be using it to create pornography of their own, or they might be using pornography in tandem with having a sexual experience with someone else because they got exposed too early and then developed tolerance, and now they can no longer achieve orgasm just by having sex with someone else. There has to be an extra level of stimulation on board in order to maintain their arousal. Of course, part of the reason that this technology is so addictive is because of its relationship with dopamine. With this particular group, I'm not going to go into great detail with this other than to say that pretty much every addictive app, social media-wise, has captured this very stimulating kind of presentation of technology that got popularized by TikTok, which is to show very brief videos with very captivating content that has lots of loud noises or music or quick changing graphics, stimulating colors. And then you scroll and get to the next one. There's an algorithmic learning that's part of that process that ensures that the content that is suggested to you will continue to be more and more alluring based on what the algorithm has learned you already like and spend time viewing. The idea being that you never reach the bottom of the reel, you never reach the bottom of TikTok or the bottom of the Instagram reel. And what they're using is this mechanism called rhythmic novelty seeking, which is when we scroll with our finger on our phone, in essence, what we're hunting for is new information. And it's in that sort of slow, repetitive, hypnotic, almost intoxicating scroll where we start to lose time and lose our sense of organization, and our executive functioning is going to slowly decrease over time and that sort of thing. These are some like collateral signs that someone might be tech addicted. And again, being addicted to technology would be one of the primary risk factors for being exposed to something like cyberbullying or social media compulsion. So that's why I add this slide in. The piece here I'll highlight, in addition to all these other signs, is this lack of distress tolerance and difficulty with embodiment. What that means is that I compulsively avoid a moment where I am still, without distraction, and I'm in my body. And so, having endless access to a smartphone is a great way to be able to insulate myself from any moment of boredom or self-reflection where things might slow down long enough for me to feel. And so, oftentimes, that may show up like keeping an earbud in at all times, listening to something, even if I can't look at my phone, or making sure my phone is out and available with something playing in the background, even while I'm eating or occupied by another task. I got to maintain that external stimulus somehow so I can stay out of my body. Um, Pornography, online gaming, and social media all have very compelling fantasy themes embedded in the material, which is part of what makes it so addictive and alluring for all of us. With social media, the opportunity is I can pull out and curate some very specific traits about who I am and then amplify those to the world and then get that reinforced through likes and comments. Which what it allows me to do is to engage fantasy as opposed to the reality of who I am. Because in that process of amplifying those particular traits or elements of my life that I want people to see, I get to minimize, hide, and obfuscate my own flaws, my own warts, the parts that make me human. And so, for a young person who's in that critical stage of identity formation, figuring out who I am, how do I belong in the group, how do I maintain who I am while trying to connect with other people and not just doing the kind of social chameleon thing, as they're navigating all of these critical pieces of their development, that's all happening through the digital medium. One quote that I think kind of anchors this point is that people go online for what they get to do and they stay for who they get to be. And for all of you listening who may not have gotten a cell phone until after you completed high school, chances are you got some pretty good reps at establishing friends, learning ways to regulate your stress, finding hobbies, maybe engaging romance or dating, and having a chance to discover some semblance of who you really are. All of those pieces of development you were able to experience um, without the use of technology. A lot of what I'm seeing in the way of damage with young people is folks who that's not the truth for. They're digital natives. They had a phone in their hand long before those developmental milestones were achieved. So those pieces of development happen through the digital medium or get hijacked by it. These are just some questions that I have found helpful in helping people to explore their relationship with social media and technology. And so, some self-reflective questions on that front would be things like, what part of myself do I amplify online and hope that others notice? And what parts do I attempt to hide? How do I compare myself to others? And who do I find I'm comparing myself to? There's some great research that was done by a woman named Celeste Headley, and she talks about the impact of comparing myself to people who are not my economic peers. It used to be we were keeping up with the Joneses, which is we're keeping up with our neighbors. I'm keeping up with people who are in close proximity to me and likely in a similar socioeconomic group. Now we have young women who might be comparing themselves to Kim Kardashian or Ariana Grande, people who are not their economic peers. And so when they're constantly inundated with that imagery, they're likely to develop a hyperfixation on their physical appearance, their weight, their relationship with food. And that's the connection that's being made in some of the research being done now with this massive influx in eating disorders and self-harm behavior, specifically in young women. Another great question to explore is thinking about things like the Explore tab on Instagram or a section of social media that's going to suggest content to you based on the algorithmic learning that's already occurred. The themes that are present can be a way to explore what might be desires I have that are being mirrored back to me through that particular function of the app. And I also get a sense of what's being marketed to me. That's a great particular space for people to get into some self-reflection about the kinds of things I pursue online or the parts of me that are being reinforced over and over again. I'm going to take just a minute to talk a little bit about to put this problem of cyberbullying and social media addiction in like a social and cultural context. The reason I'm adding this in here is having worked with a lot of teenagers who have some kind of problematic technology use, I've found that this approach of breaking down the problem to them, if you will, is a little more effective at getting them to buy into addressing it than hitting them with all this sort of here's the consequences related to social media and tech use and addiction and sort of this more psycho-emotional presentation of that material. Usually their eyes glaze over and they look at me like I imagine they look at their parents. If I approach them more from a cultural social context, it's sort of and the message ultimately that they're being duped and used. It activates that sort of teenage rebellion a little bit, and you get to get some benefits of that as a clinician. So quickly, I'll run through this. What we're able to see on the surface using the metaphor of the iceberg or the tip of the iceberg is things like social media addiction, kids continuing to maintain engagement with a technology that's also very harmful to them and this massive fragmentation of their attention. Underneath that is a targeting of their core developmental vulnerabilities, where apps like Facebook hire teams of psychologists to make sure that the social currency that is exchanged through their app is designed to hook teenagers who are in that phase of their development, where they're forming attachments with their peers, they're forming their identity, and therefore very susceptible to using the functions of the app compulsively. The platform design, of course, is that there's a very sophisticated machine learning happening. The piece underneath that is the economic driver, which is in the capitalist economy that we live in, there are certain imperatives. One of those imperatives is infinite growth, meaning if there's not continued growth, there's not going to be continued profits. The commodity is data and raw human experience, which means that the way to make money is to capture and farm larger and larger amounts of people's attention online and to find yet unexplored parts of the human experience that can be mined for more data, or what's called behavioral data. That behavioral data is amassed and categorized and analyzed by companies like Google, for example, and Google will take those categorizations and an analysis of all the user profiles it's created based on the data it consumes for where and when you go online and in what context. And then it will sell a prediction product to companies that helps them to determine what people are likely to buy, where they're likely to go, who they're likely to vote for, that sort of thing. And so underneath that is a belief system moving from a humanistic ideology to what's called dataism. Humanism is the belief that human experience is ultimately the most valuable part of living, or the sort of highest value in our society is the human experience, human emotion, love, human thinking. Dataism more positions humans as a source of data processing for larger algorithmic machine learning, and sort of has a more utopian version of a belief system purporting that technology will solve all the world's problems, including the ones that it creates. So all that to be said, it's a quick way, and I'm going through this in a rapid way, but taking the time to put this in context for young people, I find is a helpful approach to getting them to buy into addressing it. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about emotional consequences, and then there'll be a little bit of time for questions here at the end. One way to think about what's different with bullying is that most people do not have any sanctuary ultimately from the internet, meaning it is in a growing way, it is more omnipresent in our lives. And so for a young person who is being bullied and or spends a lot of time on social media, what that's going to look like is they will never have opportunities to sit and experience themselves unobserved. And as an extension of that, they're also likely not to become bored. They don't have periods of boredom because they're constantly stimulated or have access to stimulus. And if they can't get bored, they can't activate the default mode network in their brain, which is going to allow them to do things like problem solve, become introspective, pull together disparate ideas, or to become critical of the content that they consume and be able to ask questions like, is the relationship I have with this technology benefiting me? And what am I losing? Those kinds of deliberate introspective thoughts are not available to most of us that are so plugged into technology. That's an intentional outcome because we're better consumers and spend more of our attention online if we don't do that stuff. Something I find that happens is there's also this very strong connection to the experience of FOMO or fear of missing out, which is if I'm not online, I'm not sort of up to speed, I'm not aware of what's happening. And most of us, in some way, have kind of bought into this collective delusion that that's important, that we're constantly online and know what's happening. Um, okay, I'm going to skip ahead a bit, and I'm hopeful that you all will be able to get these slides and look at the ones I wasn't able to get to today. I want to mention just very briefly Jonathan Haidt's work and in his book, The Anxious Generation. What he's able to figure out is that there's this massive decline in adolescent mental health outcomes, specifically with anxiety, depression, and self-harm. And it started early in the 2010s. And if you look in his research, you'll see this trend where early in the 2010s, which is when most people started walking around with a handheld device like a smartphone, we see this steep increase in mental illness in children. We also see an increase in self-harm. The arc is a little higher for girls than it is for boys, but it's statistically significant for both. Um, and I'm going to jump ahead here to the very end with some prevention recommendations. These are just the kind of the going standard of what most people in the tech space and looking at some of the things I've talked about today recommend in the way of prevention, and that is for children not to have a smartphone until they're 16 and not to have social media access until they're 16. They can have a phone. It's just better if it's a dumb phone, doesn't have internet access. No phones or TVs in the bedroom at night. Make sure your first hour and last hour around sleep is screen free. So the first hour of waking and the last hour before you go to bed is screen free. Um, and there's an assessment tool that I really like and have found great use in, and it's called the Internet Addiction Test. And it was created by a woman named Dr. Kimberly Young, who was credited with being the first person to use the term internet addiction in academic literature. If you just Google Internet Addiction Test, Kimberly Young, you'll find this 20-item questionnaire. It's scored on a five-point Likert scale. Really easy to take and score, and it's my go-to tool with anyone I'm working with who might be tech addicted. So for all of you on the call, my challenge or homework assignment would be go online and take the assessment for yourself and see where you land and be willing to get into some self-inquiry about your relationship with technology. So I see Mark is back, and I'm going to stop talking now and turn it back over to you. Thank you all so much for having me.
No, thank you so much. Question for you. What are some strategies that we can discuss with parents of neurodivergent children to help protect them?
Excellent question. If you're working with a neurodivergent child who might have ADHD or autism spectrum, I would start by saying that there is a massive overlap or interplay between autism spectrum and screen addiction because children who get exposed to a lot of technology too early have atypical sensory processing issues, and there's a lot of research coming out about that. So be willing to consider something like a brief abstinence period from technology, and be considerate if you're working with someone who has autism spectrum. Make sure they have alternate strategies to STEM that don't involve technology, because sometimes they might use their phone as visual or tactile stemming. Just make sure they have some other opportunities on board so they can do that safely. But be willing to consider something like an abstinence period so you can determine what is producing the symptoms. Is it compulsive technology use, or is it a true neurodevelopmental disorder?
Okay. And how long does it take to reverse the addiction? And can you reverse you show the SPECT images and things like that. Is that reversible?
Um, I think is it reversible, or the timeline on that? I've not seen data to show that. What I would say is I've certainly seen people be successful with starting with even a brief abstinence period and then resetting the kind of redrawing the lines with their technology use. What I have found is very possible is that people all along the lifespan can achieve those like missed gaps in their development as long as they're willing to get out of a compulsive relationship with technology. like other addictions, to drugs or alcohol, if we get the brain out of a compulsive state and into a healing one, things can certainly improve.
All right. Always fascinating, Mike. Thanks for the lecture.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
All right.